so let's get started with the seminar. So we are looking at themes. So those of you who are in year 7 now, or in the middle of high school, themes is pretty much like the focus. Like without a proper theme, there's really nothing for us to really analyze in our essays, right? And moving from primary school to high school, even like in high school now, the themes that we find in the text can often be quite obscure. We're not really sure where to start. We're not really sure what ideas and messages we're meant to be putting forward, and it can be a pretty confusing concept. All right, so today we're going to define themes. We'll look at how we actually identify themes in the text, and then we're going to move forward and look at how we construct an actual message from said themes. Okay. All right, so introduction. Yeah, so we're going to go through what themes are. We're going to look at a focus text with Hansel and Gretel, and we'll look at how to identify themes in Hansel and Gretel, and I'll give you some sort of kind of overall steps that you should follow in order to pick out the right themes in the text. And then we'll go through some common themes we find in some example texts that you will come across in high school. Awesome. All right, let's keep going. All right, so the broad definition of a theme is a major concern of a text. But just saying the words major concern doesn't really mean much to us, right? We're not really, a major concern can be anything, right? So to actually understand and analyze things, we have to think a little bit deeper than that. So a better definition of a theme is it's not just a topic. Themes are things that are hidden beneath the events and the conversations in a text. So I'm going to give you guys an example story, and we'll look at what is a theme and what is not a theme in that story. So, all right, so I have, a family. We've got, a large family. We're all going on a fishing trip, right? We've packed our bags. We've bought all of our fishing equipment. We've driven out to this really far lake, and, we've set up camp by the water. Right, we're all really excited. We've never been fishing before. We've heard that, this is a really great spot to catch carp, perch, any type of fish. Right, so sit by the water. It's still morning. We're still excited. Everyone's really geared up and ready to kind of catch some fish. But as the day progresses, it's midday now, and no one's really caught anything. Right, it's been a very boring morning. Everyone's just standing, sitting by the water, not really sure what to do. And as the afternoon comes as well, the spirits are much slower. Right? Everyone's feeling a little bit disappointed at the fact that no one's been able to catch any fish, even though they see, nearby, they've got other families who are catching lots of fish. Right? So they feel a little bit frustrated, a little bit disappointed. And, they decide, all right, we're going to pack up and leave when it's 6 p.m. Right? But just as it's, nearing 6 p.m., it's, 5:45, one of the, children feels a huge tug on their line, right? And they're pulling, they're reeling the fish, and it's a humongous, a really big fish that passes the regulation limits, and they can take it home. Right, so they take home the fish, they cook it up, and it's delicious. Right? And everyone's really ecstatic because, they saw the other people nearby, all the other families who were catching fish. They were catching tiny fish, right? And a lot of them they had to throw back. But this time, the actual fish that they managed to catch was a really big one, and it was really delicious. All right, so what happened in that story? Right, at its core, it's a very simple story. It's about fishing. However, the theme of that story is not fishing. Fishing is simply the event that happened. And, the feelings of frustration and anticipation and patience, they were just the feelings that kind of go along, the characters were experiencing. The actual theme of that text might be the idea of waiting for a reward. Hard work and patience pays off, right? It's not simply the idea of fishing. Right? Fishing is not the theme of that text. So whenever you look at a text and try to think to yourself what the theme could be, try to remove the actual, events and storyline of the text from your mind, right? The characters themselves are not themes, right? However, the abstract kind of concepts and emotions that they feel may play a part in the theme. Okay, themes are intangible, and they give the story greater meaning and influence. Right. So the whole point of that fishing story is, if they had gone there, threw their fishing reel into the water and caught the first humongous fish within the first 10 minutes, the anticipation and the build-up wouldn't be the same. Right? They're not going to feel that same level of satisfaction. They're not going to feel the same level of excitement that they did, at the end when they worked so hard and waited so long. Okay. So themes can kind of divide very loosely into two kind of categories. The first type of category is universal themes. And universal themes you might have heard of already. They're basically themes that traverse any time, any place, any culture, any race, anything. Right? They're things that are so innate to us humans that anyone can experience them. Right? Anyone and everyone has or will experience them. Things like love, things like grief, loss, courage, determination. Right? They are all things that are, relevant to everyone. Okay? You might also get themes that are more relevant to the context of a text. Right? So think to, your Elizabethan era texts, different, points in history. They might have certain things that they concern themselves with more than we do in our modern society. Right? So in our modern society, we might look at themes more like surveillance. Right? That's been more relevant to us. Whereas back in the day, we looked at, there might be other themes such as, first wave feminism, more contextually relevant themes. Right? There also might be themes that not everyone can relate to. Right? Not everyone will understand poverty. Right? But everyone will understand like love. It doesn't really matter whether a theme is universal or more specific to a text, because we should be able to extract greater meaning from it anyways. Okay? With the more universal themes, it kind of just shows us that these are very innate human qualities that kind of surpass any sort of barrier. With the themes that are more relevant to the context of a text, we do need to do a little bit more research and look at the actual, author or the producer of a text and see what their life was in order to understand that theme better. Yeah, so that's a broad definition of themes. Let's move on. So we're going to talk a little bit about Hansel and Gretel. So hopefully we all have heard of this story before. It's a very popular children's fairy tale. And like all children's fairy tale, there are various iterations of Hansel and Gretel out there. Right? I'm sure the version that I'm going to talk about is not going to be the same one that you heard when you were younger or now, but the general premise is very much the same. So the idea of Hansel and Gretel is, we have a very poor family whose mother and, we have the two children, Hansel and Gretel, and their father, who is a poor woodcutter. Right? Their mother passed away when they were younger, and now the father's married some evil stepmother. And because they're very poor, they can't really afford to buy much food. And the evil stepmother proposes the idea that they go deep into the woods and leave the two children there. Because if they leave the two children there, just the mother and the father will have more food for themselves. So as, the stepmother is talking to the father about this, the two children are in bed, but they're so hungry because they haven't eaten in so long that they can't fall asleep, and they overhear the entire conversation. Okay. So Hansel and Gretel start panicking. They're a bit nervous. They don't know what to do because they know they're going to get abandoned in the woods. Okay. But Hansel comes up with a plan. So the next morning, when the father very begrudgingly takes the two children out, he tells them that they're going to go deep into the woods and cut firewood. Okay. So he walks, a very, very long way, and he to reach this little kind of setting in the middle of the forest. Right. The entire time, Hansel's kind of lagging behind, and the father asks, "Why are you lagging behind?" And he says, "I'm just looking for, this little kitten that I saw." Once they reach the little location, the father tells them, "All right, wait here. I want to gather some firewood for you guys, and I will be right back." Okay. However, we all know that the father is not going to come back. So Hansel and Gretel wait and wait, and night falls, and Gretel gets increasingly anxious and scared. Right? But Hansel tells her, "No, it's okay. Once it is fully nighttime, I've actually scattered white pebbles along the path that we walked, and when it's nighttime, the moonlight will illuminate the pebbles on the ground and will create a path to find our way home." Right? So as soon as night falls, they see the path lit up by moonlight, and the two children follow the path all the way home. And once they reach home, of course, the stepmother is furious. Right? She's furious that the two children have made it home, whereas, the father is secretly really happy that his 2 children are still alive. So the next morning, the same thing happens, right? Hansel and Gretel both know that the stepmother is still planning to abandon them in the woods. But this time, he doesn't have time to gather the white pebbles that he's strewn on the ground the night before. So instead, as the 2 children are following their father into the woods, Hansel scatters the pieces of breadcrumbs from the slice of bread that he gets from his stepmother. Right? As they reach the location, his father very, sadly leaves them. Hansel and Gretel are not as nervous as they once were because they know that they've scattered the path, the breadcrumbs to create a path on the way back. But beknownst to them, a crow has come and eaten all the breadcrumbs. Okay? So when night falls, Hansel realizes that there's no path for them to follow. Right? And of course, the 2 children get very anxious and very scared because they're, abandoned in the middle of the woods and they have to survive. In the next morning, they have a very tough night's sleep. The next morning, they see a white dove, and this white dove is, chirping and singing, and it's like kind of flittering between the trees. Hansel and Gretel follow the white dove, and they eventually reach this gingerbread house. Right? All the roof is made of cake. The walls are made of, bread. There's icing. There's chocolate. It looks very, delectable. Because the 2 children haven't eaten a proper meal in so long, they can't help themselves but dig into the house. Right? Inside, the 2 children know that, this is not their property and they shouldn't be doing this because it's someone else's house. But they're so overcome with, the need to eat and the desire for food that they ignore those, moral quips and they just go for it. As they're devouring the house, a voice emerges and out emerges a very old woman. And this old woman tells them, kind of reprimands them. Why are you eating my house? Right? So she takes them capture and she keeps them in, the house. So the old woman is a witch and she tells Hansel and Gretel that she's going to eat them. But because they were so impoverished and they didn't have much food, they're very skinny. So what the witch does is she gets Gretel to help her around the house and do household chores because she's very, very old and blind. And she puts Hansel into a cage and cooks up very delicious, decadent meals for him to eat so that he can get fattened up so that the witch can cook him. Right, so the 2 children are obviously terrified, but they just, but Hansel kind of whispers to Gretel that, don't worry, I've got a plan. They're going to try to stall the witch out as long as possible so they can find a way to escape. So as the witch is, filling up Hansel with a lot of food, every day she asks him, like, come, let me feel your finger to see how fat you've gotten. Right? Because the witch is very old and very blind. But instead of actually giving him his finger, which is getting fatter and fatter because he's eating so much, he gives him, a chewed chicken bone. That's supposed to be very thin. And the witch is confused. She doesn't understand why Hansel is still so skinny. Right? And as the time progresses, the witch kind of gets more and more impatient. And she finally decides, whatever, I don't mind if he's still a bit skinny. I'm going to cook him anyways. Right, so she opens up the oven and she tells Gretel to clean the inside of the oven out so that she can roast the boy. Right. Gretel says, I can't really reach in. Could you help me? So when the old witch kind of leans over into the oven to kind of take out the pots and pans that are inside, Gretel does, one mighty push and pushes her all the way into the oven, closes the lid and, turns on the oven. Right. So Hansel and Gretel manage to defeat the old witch. Gretel frees Hansel from the cage, and the 2 of them discover a huge chest full of pearls, diamonds, and other gems inside the witch's inside of her hut. Right? So at the end of the story, the 2 kids kind of wander back into the woods. They follow a duck along a river, and with, their arms full of all of the precious gems, they manage to find their way back into their old home with their father. Yeah, luckily for them, the stepmother has died, right, because of an illness, and the father is more than happy to see them. And because they have all of the precious gems, they're able to sell it, and they become, a more wealthy, more comfortable home. The end. So I'm sure that you guys probably heard that story. If not, just a little summary. But even if you had a little bit of a different version, the general ideas are still the same. So now let's have a look at see what the themes were in that story and what the themes were not in the story. All right, so what were not the themes? Things like bread, being in a forest, gingerbread houses, evil witches, evil stepmothers, right? Leaving pebbles on the ground to create a path. They are all, events and part of the story, part of the plot. However, they are not themes. Because remember, our themes have to be intangible, they're abstract ideas, and they're also things that should apply to other texts as well. Themes are not unique to a particular text because they're not impactful if they are unique. If a theme is unique to a text, then as an audience, as the reader or the audience, we aren't able to resonate well with them because we don't understand them at all. Right? Themes should be things that we have, a general understanding with or a general kind of experience with. And that's what helps us analyze and understand them. So what are some of the themes in Hansel and Gretel? Right, there's multiple themes. I've just picked out some of the, the top 3. Gluttony. Right, the evil stepmother is, greedy, for more food. She's gluttonous. She wants to get rid of the 2 kids. Right. The 2 children, although they are starved and impoverished, they are still gluttonous when they kind of devour the gingerbread house. Resilience. Right, resilience is also another theme in Hansel and Gretel because we see, Hansel kind of continues to persevere and think of these little plans despite, the odds stacked against them. Right, he's able to come up with the pebbles, and even though the breadcrumbs ends up being, doesn't end up working, he still kind of attempts that. He also feeds, he also gives the old witch the chicken bone instead of his finger, and Gretel manages to outsmart the witch and push her into the fire to kill her. Right. At its core, though, poverty is also a really important theme in the story because had the family been very rich and wealthy and well-fed, the whole story wouldn't have happened. All right, so hopefully that makes it a bit more clear about what, the themes are definitely not in a story. Is gluttony greediness? So gluttony is greediness, but for food. Okay, so I'll say like a subset of greediness. Awesome, so let's keep going. And let's look at how we actually identify the themes and construct a message. So the first thing we do is we start by making inferences based upon the recurring ideas and motifs in a text. Right? So remember, themes are abstract and intangible ideas. So we look at things that happen, that come up throughout the text. Right? During Hansel and Gretel, it continually comes up that the 2 children keep getting abandoned, but they keep kind of outsmarting the adults and try to come up with plans to save themselves. Right? If they keep trying and trying about something and they are succeeding, but they're also not succeeding, that is an example of determination, thus resilience. Okay. Once we kind of have identified a very broad idea, a broad abstract and tangible idea, we define it. Right? Obviously, words have multiple definitions. They are used differently in different contexts. So we give a broad definition and then we narrow it down and apply it more relevantly to a particular text. So an example of this would be like the theme of love. Right? Love is a very broad idea, but there are many different types of love. Right? In Romeo and Juliet, we don't really worry too much about, familial love is not really a key factor in Romeo and Juliet. In Romeo and Juliet, we focus more on romantic love and platonic love. Right? So we apply wherever, we apply the definition of the theme most relevantly to whatever text we're doing. Okay? Not every part of the definition will make sense to the story. Not every part of the definition is needed. We only kind of look at what we see in the story itself. Then we try to construct a cause and effect, and this kind of forms the basis of our thesis or our topic sentence for our analytical paragraph or essay. In order to construct a cause and effect, remember, cause and effect, one action leads to some sort of result or some sort of effect. So in order to do that, a good way to approach it is to consider the progression of events and character in the text. What that means is who are we before and after? Right? How does the plot progress? What is a problem that arises, and how do the characters react to that problem? Oftentimes, the characters before personality and after personality is a good indication of the effect of a particular theme or a particular cause. For example, right, those of you who have done Macbeth, the beginning of Macbeth, whilst he is still power hungry and he's greedy for his reputation, he's not a downright evil person, from the very beginning, right? But as he gets a taste for power, we kind of see his morality erode more and more and more until he becomes this very debauched and very, immoral person at the very end, right? That progression of character shows us how, power can erode our morality, and that's our cause and effect. Right, so look at the before and the after of the particular characters and see how the actual events of the story kind of influence that. All right, so let's do that for Hansel and Gretel now. So we're going to look at resilience first. So Google tells us that a broad definition of resilience is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. And I think that's very relevant to Hansel and Gretel, right? Even though the children get told that, over here they're going to get abandoned in the woods, Hansel manages to kind of collect the pebbles and construct this plan in order to save him and his sister from dying alone in the woods. Okay. All right, so we apply to the text. We think of example of a character of an instance from the text that applies to this definition. So yeah, Hansel adapts to being abandoned and devises a plan to save him and his sister. And then secondly, Hansel and Gretel outsmart the evil witch. Of course, the application to the text is not one singular moment, right? Because if you think about, when we write our actual analysis paragraph, we have multiple TQPs and multiple things that we kind of identify, right? So we do need, a couple of examples of applications. And remember, they don't always have to be the same characters. They can be different characters. They can be used in a contrasting way, which we'll see later. All right, so we look at the kind of the progression of character, because they are resilient and they manage to outsmart the adults. As a result, what happens? They return home safely and eventually escape, and they defeat the witch and they live happily ever after. Okay? It's a very, joyous, nice ending for both Hansel and Gretel. Yeah, so cause and effect, yes. So we're going to look at cause and effect now and then, now that we've identified the definition and the progression of character. So we want to kind of put all of this together into a message, right? And that message can be, I've just given an example message here. Unwavering resilience in the face of adversity is rewarded with safety and freedom. Right? So we have our cause when we are unwaveringly resilient. We are rewarded with safety and freedom. Right? That's our effect. And we see that because that's pretty much mimicked by the progression of character in our application of the theme. Remember, you don't have to define the theme in your answer, but you need to just apply it and see where it's relevant. Okay? So resilience is a very broad theme. However, it applies very perfectly to Hansel and Gretel. There's not really any excess kind of unnecessary, def part of resilience that's not appropriate here. But like I mentioned earlier, if it's a more broad theme, something like love, or even courage, apply it where relevant. I know every type of love is, important. Not every type of courage will be important. Awesome. So I hope that makes it a bit more clear. Let's do one more example. So the second example we're going to look at is gluttony. Right. So someone asked earlier, is gluttony greediness? Yes, it is. Right. So gluttony is a type of greed in which we are very greedy for food. Right. So we overeat or we kind of want more than we can have. There are a couple of different applications of gluttony in Hansel and Gretel. So we'll look at two contrasting ones. Like I mentioned earlier, not every theme will be identified or explored in the same way in a text. And in fact, when a theme is explored in different ways in a text, it actually makes it a bit more interesting because we see how multifaceted some themes can be, right? Gluttony or greed or power, they're not, even though as a society or overall we do see them as negative kind of traits or sins, there are still, multiple kind of facets and multiple sides to those themes in which we can see the positives. Okay? And when a text kind of looks at these from different characters' perspectives, we are able to kind of see that. Just give me ones. Yeah. All right. Okay. So how do we apply gluttony? So first of all, we see it in the evil stepmother. Right? The evil stepmother who wishes to get rid of the two children ultimately dies an untimely death. Right? It's her greed and her gluttony that kind of forces the father to abandon his own kids and leave them to die in the woods. But at the end of the story, even though we don't hear it happen or see it happen, we know that she dies. Right? She doesn't get the happy ending that she would clearly not deserve. The second clear example of gluttony would be when the two children indulge in the gingerbread house and are entrapped by the witch. However, in contrast to this evil stepmother who gets punished for her kind of gluttony, they are able to escape and they're rewarded. So let's look at why those two things are different, right? Why are those two things different? They're different because of their root cause, right? The evil stepmother, wanting more food because they are, impoverished is not a crime, but the fact that she wants to kill off two children in order to achieve or to kind of gain more food, that's a very immoral thing to do, and thus she gets punished for that. However, we think about the two children who are, lost and scared and abandoned in the middle of the woods. They haven't had a proper meal to eat for days, and they're starving. For them, eating the gingerbread house is not an act to kind of offend or hurt the owner of the house. They are simply overcome with a desire for food that they cannot control their gluttony. Right? It's almost as if we can't really blame them for eating the gingerbread house, because had we been in their shoes, we probably would have done the same thing. Right? Not many people would be able to step back and ask for permission before they kind of indulge because they are just so hungry. That's why, even though they still are equally gluttonous, the two children end up being rewarded at the end of the story, right? Because their gluttony does not stem from an evil and immoral place. It comes from a place of vulnerability, and it comes from a place of necessity. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting kind of look at just one theme of gluttony, and we'll look at how we can analyze that. So this is a type of theme that is really nice to analyze in comparative paragraphs, right? Because we look at the gluttony on the evil stepmother side, which is very one-dimensional, right? You are gluttonous, therefore you get punished. Whereas when it comes to the two children, they don't have a choice. They're extremely vulnerable and impoverished kind of people who are just taking what they have, right? What they have found or stumbled upon, right? So obviously, very different ideas, and makes for very two clear body paragraphs that you can talk about and really understand how gluttony is a multifaceted human trait. All right, so I've just written two kind of cause and effect statements here, one for the evil stepmother and the other is for the two children. The first one reads, gluttony corrupts morals and has the power to control the vulnerable and weak-minded. Right, so we still have a cause and effect, right? So the cause is gluttony, and the effect is it corrupts morals as well as has the ability to control the vulnerable and weak-minded. And by that, I'm talking more about the stepfather who is coerced into abandoning his own children by the stepmother, and because he still realizes the logic in her statement, and yet his own, even though he's still sad to see his children die, or to see his children kind of be abandoned, and he's very ecstatic to see them back, he still kind of does the deed. So I feel like in Hansel and Gretel, we never really talk that much about the father. He's almost seen as like an unsung hero. However, you still, I think it's still kind of interesting to realize that he is also, almost a villain in the story, because he's the one who perpetrates, the acts here. He could have just kind of very resiliently said, no, I'm not going to do that. They're my kids. I love them. I'm never going to abandon them. And the story might have unfurled in a different way. Okay. So that's a cause and effect topic sentence that we can look at for gluttony as a purely kind of evil or bad trait. However, on the other hand, looking at the two children now, say gluttonous acts performed by vulnerable individuals cannot be punished as they are driven by necessity and poverty. Right? So here the cause and effect is not as clear. You can kind of identify it as necessity and poverty drive gluttonous acts. Right? The effect is committing gluttonous acts. Right? But more importantly, the message is that we cannot punish people for performing those acts when they are vulnerable and impoverished and obviously disadvantaged compared to the rest. Right? Had Hansel and Gretel been really well fed, really happy and wealthy children, maybe they wouldn't have gorged on the gingerbread house. Right? In saying that, if they were happy and well fed and wealthy, and they still gorged on the gingerbread house, then that will be an example of kind of one-dimensional, just evil gluttony. Right? They're taking something that doesn't belong to them without any second thought. Right? Then the story would be very different. But here, because they are vulnerable, they are impoverished, they don't really have any other choice, we can't blame them. We can't kind of point fingers and say, you are evil for doing this. Right? So that's the whole idea of that topic sentence there. We can't punish people when they are simply vulnerable and in need of food. All right, so obviously we looked at gluttony in a bit more detail and kind of looked at it from a couple of different angles, but hopefully that makes a bit more clear to everyone how we identify and analyze themes in an example text. Okay, let me just take a quick pause here. Does anyone have any questions, anything that want to ask or clarify before we move on? Awesome. I'm going to take the silence for there are no questions and we're all okay with what just happened. Right. Obviously, with identifying themes and creating topic sentences, it's not something that you learn the steps and then you immediately know how to do overnight. You can define a define a theme. You can apply it relevantly to the text, yet you still might not be able to create a good topic sentence. Right? You still might get feedback on your work and saying you need to understand the theme better. So don't worry too much. As long as you're putting in effort and taking home, these pointers, that's all we need. Okay. With understanding themes to a greater or deeper extent, it comes down to two main things. Right. As humans, we learn things from our mistakes. We learn things from our experiences, and thus we learn themes like love, courage, grief, death, loss, better when we experience them firsthand ourselves. Because when we experience things, we know our own reactions. We know the reactions of people around us. We know how it affects our friendships, our relationships, and we know how it affects our own, morality or our own psyche. Right? So when we go through things firsthand, we can kind of look at the progression of character and see how that's relevant to an ordinary human being, and be able to analyze them a little bit deeper and a bit more accurately. Right? Of course, those things, you can't force experiences, and not everyone will understand the same kind of themes to the same extent. That's okay. Just kind of keep in mind that, as you kind of get older and as you experience more and mature, themes will get a bit more clear to you and it will be a bit more obvious and a bit more common sense involved. The other way to look at it is in literature, cinema, etc. Right? No matter what the text is, no matter how, no matter if it gets 99 Rotten Tomatoes on Rotten Tomatoes or like a 17 on Rotten Tomatoes, there will still be a theme or an idea or something driving the text. Right? And, obviously with reading and, watching movies or TV shows, it's not effective if you just simply watch it for enjoyment. Although I know it's not fun to watch something and have to think about the themes that are in the text. But oftentimes, we understand the theme subconsciously anyways, because as we're watching the movie or reading the book, we're kind of absorbing and following the characters' kind of journeys through the story. And we'll notice, things that drive that journey. Okay. So if you feel like, themes is something that you're very weak with, and, without a teacher's guidance or a tutor's guidance, you have a very hard time picking out those themes. The next time you read a book or watch a movie, halfway through or at the end, ask yourself, what was the whole point of that film? What did the kind of director or the writer want me to take home from that film or that book, right? Consider, why do the characters behave the way they did, and why did the plot kind of unfurl the way it did? Right? What made everything kind of special and unique about this? Right? Make sure that the theme that you're talking about is intangible and abstract. Right? Themes are not plot points, nor are they characters. Right? They shouldn't be things that we can really hold in our hand. Okay? And if you want to go a step further, think about the progression of character and try to see if you can come up with a cause and effect to kind of analyze that theme and create a message. Awesome. Hopefully that's clear to everyone. So yes, so just answering question, this recording will be available on Venmo once it uploads. So you can rewatch this. All right. So I should have mentioned this earlier on as well. Yeah, you don't really need to take down any notes unless you would like to. The main thing is kind of just understanding the steps we go through to identify the themes and what a theme actually is. All right, so the last section here, we're going to go through some example text. We're going to go through some common themes and then the example text in which we see them in. All right, so this part, you guys can type in the chat any other texts that you've read or any movies that you've seen that also follow these themes. And we'll talk a little bit about the common messages we see about these themes. Okay, I'm happy for you. I'm sure not everyone's very keen to unmute themselves. That's totally fine. You can just message the chat to contribute your thoughts. That's also fine. All right, so common theme, the first one, let's start off with love, right? We see love in pretty much, I'll say, almost every text, right? Some sort of love will always be there. So we have, Romeo and Juliet, The Great Gatsby, Pride and Prejudice, A Midsummer's Night Dream, just to name a few. Those are all kind of texts that you'll probably see more commonly in high school. Emma, Jane Austen did write, a lot of texts that kind of circled around love, but not just romantic love. Little Women, we definitely see a lot of familial love. I think the bond between all the sisters in Little Women is a very, good example of, very pure familial love. And it's the lengths we'll go to for our family. A lot of Disney princess movies, 100%. I'll say almost like every Disney movie has an element of love in it, right? Whether it be romantic or platonic, we always see the relationships between the characters. Hunger Games, I think Hunger Games is a very interesting kind of example of love. You definitely see like familial love between Katniss and her family, kind of the lengths she'll go to protect them. We also see like a performative type of love between like Katniss and Peter during the Hunger Games. Wonder, I'm not familiar with Wonder. So do you want to tell us what kind of love we see in Wonder? Or not, totally fine. I'll just let you guys I know typing and uploading your answer is a little bit time consuming. So I'll try to follow along as we go. Right, so different types of love have different types of, impacts. Right, love we see as a very kind of positive and good trait. But those of you who have, done Midsummer's Night Dream or, Romeo and Juliet, you can see how there are also very negative impacts of love. Right? Love can kind of erode, our clarity, make us, more susceptible, more vulnerable, or, it can degrade our own personality, etc. I think it's always more interesting in text where a theme is explored in a non-traditional way, right? Because we all know that love can be this very beautiful thing that teaches us more about ourselves, but it's more interesting to kind of look at how, love can actually like corrupt you or change you. All right, so so Wonder, so we have familial love and Wonder then. Second one, power and corruption, also a really, really big theme. So here on the slide, I've got 1984, Macbeth, King Lear, Citizen Kane, Metropolis, right? And in those texts, power and corruption is seen as a very negative thing. Right? We see a lot about the negative consequences of power and corruption on our own morality, on the way that we on our relationships, etc. Does anyone have any other texts that they want to kind of share about power and corruption? I'm going to assume LOK and AT, is it Avatar? Yeah, Legend of Korra and Avatar The Last Airbender. Yeah, we see, how a tyrannous, oppressive regime, can, overcome people's, collective morality and corrective, morality. Yeah. Harry Potter, definitely. Right. This greed for power can erode our sense of camaraderie, or, it can, destroy relationships and change the way we treat people. Yeah, Game of Thrones, 100%. Right. Power and corruption, definitely a very, Hunger Games as well. Yeah, also a very, very popular text. Very popular theme. You'll see it all throughout Shakespeare. Anything that's for anything with action also will typically have this idea of power and corruption. So what are some common messages that we associate with power and corruption? Power, the greed or our, the desire for more power can, cloud our judgment. Right? But what are some kind of positive or, non-traditional views into power and corruption? Yeah, movies are about politics, definitely 100% about power and corruption. What about anything on the flip side? Like, what's an example of some sort of message we can attribute to power and corruption? Titanic. I think Titanic more so for love. Yeah, power can raise one from ashes and help them out in need. Yeah. Good. Right. Power can often give us the personal power, personal drive for us to do better. Power feeds into ambition and helps us achieve and accomplish our goals. Right. So power is the ability to influence and direct the behavior of others. So that's a definition. Right. But in order to construct a cause and effect kind of message, we need to apply it more relevantly. So it depends on what text you're doing. So yes, it's the ability to influence others. In what way? Right. So you want to kind of give an effect and see how we can actually apply power. Corruption is a spell that power and greed controls us with. Ooh, that sounds very metaphorical. But corruption of what? Right? So political corruption, corruption of your own morality, right? You do need to go a little bit more in detail. But yeah, awesome. Let's move on. Oppression or autonomy. Oppression or autonomy is, I feel like, not as obvious a tech theme, but it is also a theme that you see almost in every text. Right? Autonomy is this idea of self. It's this idea of individuality and being able to kind of make decisions on your own behalf, not to be controlled by the society or the rules that govern you. Right? So a lot of dystopic texts are about oppression and autonomy because they're suppressing, they're trying to create everyone as equal, or they're trying to stamp out personality and create, a machine-like kind of factory, a machine-like society. So texts like 1984, Fahrenheit 451, Brave New World, they're all examples of dystopic texts. Right. So those of you who are not sure, the dystopia genre is based on, it's like we try to craft a perfect society. We are always, ultimately we are always unsuccessful because of individual differences, right? As much as you would like to control everything, everyone has their own personality, their own wants and their own desires and needs. You are not able to kind of even out and make everyone the same. Also, Pride and Prejudice, The Hunger Games, this idea of, the power of oneself against society, right? So we see autonomy as a very kind of positive trait. We want to be able to stand out. We want to march to the beat of our own drum. We want to have our own personal power, right? Because autonomy tells us, allows us to introspect and kind of consider our own actions and our own beliefs. It helps us to grow, right? But on the flip side, there are still negative kind of aspects to autonomy, and still I would say there's not really, I can't really think of any positive aspects of oppression, but yeah. Awesome, let's keep going. There's a couple more themes that we want to go through. Endgame, in Endgame, Thanos is trying to control the world by evening it out, wiping out half the population, but he fails as the world crumbles, as everyone has their own needs and loved ones and they fail without them. Yeah, I think that's a really good example, right? Although his kind of original motive to him seems very logical, it's flawed because whilst we will have more resources, you know, what binds people together and what kind of creates society is not how much we have, but the connections that we have with other people. And by wiping out other people, we lose that connection. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think that talks both about power and, you know, oppression and autonomy. Yeah, Diary of Anne Frank, The Boy in Striped Pajamas. Yeah, I think almost every war story will have an element of power and corruption and oppression in it because that is the nature of war. Awesome. Yeah, so I think, yeah, like what I can see from the chat, everyone who's contributed, yeah, we all kind of understood or have a general idea of like the basic themes in particular texts and how we can kind of analyze them and see, you know, what's unique about those themes that kind of makes them relevant, whether it's, you know, in a Shakespeare play or in, you know, a modern day biopic or action film. Texts in which rich people steal from the poor or make their lives horrible. Yeah. Awesome. So prejudice, right? We look at some different types of prejudice: racial prejudice, gender, class, right? Also a very popular kind of, also a very popular theme. See a lot in political texts, any texts which are about, you know, almost like the individual or something special or unique about the individual, you'll see. So racial prejudice we see in Maya Angelou's poetry, in To Kill a Mockingbird. That's probably like one of the first examples people will think about. In gender, we see a lot in Sylvia Plath's poetry, right? Anything about feminism. We also see gender in a lot of like Jane Austen's books as well. Class, we see that in Pride and Prejudice, most kind of evidently, right? But with class prejudice, it is more of a contextual theme, as in we don't really have that now because we don't live in a medieval, even though we have like royalty and kings and queens, that's not something that divides society. Like we don't have noblemen or the peasants, the merchants, etc. We've kind of moved on from that part of our history. So class as a theme is not as relevant in modern day texts, but definitely something that you'll still see in texts from, you know, set in Elizabethan England or any of those kind of any of, you know, the main reigning monarchies in Europe. And the last thing we'll kind of talk about now is just courage. Right, courage also a huge theme. Multiple different sides to courage as well. Just as an example, you know, Harry Potter, you have a very kind of stock standard kind of defeat the bad guy. We're doing this for the greater good. Example of courage. In To Kill a Mockingbird, you know, Atticus Finch, you know, becoming a lawyer or you taking on this case is an example of, you know, kind of courage against his society and his, you know, the town that he, you know, lives in. Handmaid's Tale, The Hunger Games, Lord of the Rings, right? A lot of like any adventure kind of action story or book has an element of courage because there is an element of danger as well. And whilst we commonly associate courage with, you know, physical strength or physical displays of courage, you know, remember there are still mental courage, which we see in To Kill a Mockingbird, right? The ability to kind of push against prejudice is an example of courage, right? So you'll see how a lot of the texts that we've kind of talked about in this little section here do overlap, right? Just 1 second. Sorry about that. Yeah. So you'll see that a lot of the texts kind of overlap, and we see that often. Yeah, awesome. So does anyone have any questions about what we've kind of gone through today? Silence. Yeah, awesome. All right. That's totally fine. So that's the end of the seminar. Those of you who kind of joined us a little bit later, that's fine. Handmaid's Tale is a dystopic text by Margaret Atwood, and it's about, I'll say, yeah, also about gender prejudice. So how do I say it without spoiling it? I think it is a quite a mature text. It's also been made into like a TV show. Have a look online. I don't want to spoil the story in case anyone's kind of interested in it, but it's about like this dystopic society in which women are, treated as objects. But yeah, awesome. So those of you who have not yet put your emails in the chat, I would highly appreciate that if you do. So over the next 24 hours, probably tomorrow, you'll be sent a worksheet based on the kind of things that we've talked about today. And you can go ahead and do that once you are sent that. So please put your email in the chat so that we can actually see, send it to you and you can receive it. Awesome. All right. If you put your email in the chat already, then you don't need to do it again. All the chat is saved, so we'll be able to have a look. But otherwise, hopefully you guys enjoyed the seminar, took something home from it. There will be another seminar running on Sunday at 10 to 11 as well, and it's going to be on Shakespeare. Okay. And that's all. Yeah. So I'll leave the chat running. I'm going to end the recording now.